Hi there, APUSH friends. I want to just set up the movie we're going to watch a little bit here, just so you kind of know a little bit of what you're seeing. We've talked a lot about the Cold War. We've talked a lot about the idea of containing communism. And we talked about what happened in Korea. And so, what I want you guys to really understand here is that the Vietnam War is an extension of all of that. It's an extension of containment, it's an extension of kind of what happened in Korea. Except there's a lot of lessons to be learned here about what not to do. And I think we're going to see that through the movie. I think you guys are really going to love the movie. It's one of my favorite things to show you. My students every year love it. The soundtrack is killer and it's really powerful. So I think you're really going to like it. So just to set that up, you're going to want to have that timeline. I know it's super old. I know the date on it says like 1998, but it's a really good one. And I love that it has sort of the whole story in one spot. So you're going to want to take a look at that timeline and keep it out, keep it available. It might even be helpful to print it as you're watching the film. Okay, the film's in two different parts. Make sure you watch the correct part first, or you'll be way confused. So it's going to start off by telling you that what you're about to watch is all true. Nothing is made up. It is actual letters home that soldiers and nurses wrote. It is actual footage that the journalists on the ground took. It is actual newscasts. So think about that. This is our first televised war, and I think that's going to do a lot to shape people's opinion. So Vietnam, really, our involvement begins with the Battle of Dien Bien Phu. And you see that on the timeline there, 1954. We were actually kind of, even right after World War II, we were sort of involved in helping rebuild. So Vietnam, like many places in Asia, was taken over by the Japanese during World War II. And they had been a French colony before that. You might remember that from world history. So they were fiercely resisting all of that under this guy here. This is Ho Chi Minh, okay? So Ho Chi Minh is going to be the leader that's going to resist first the French, and then the Japanese, and then the French again. And he leads this nicknamed Barefoot Army against the French army. And in 1954, they win. And they're able to kick the French out of Vietnam, what was then called French Indochina. So this is a huge victory for them. It's kind of an embarrassment for France. But honestly, if you look at this year, you got to remember France is still reeling from World War II, right? And they're also dealing with rebuilding and the threat of communism growing in Eastern Europe. And so those are all things that play here as well. But we can't deny the fact that people really rallied behind Ho Chi Minh and his cause. And his cause was freedom for his people. So at first glance, I always say, think about this. You know, he's a freedom fighter, right? He's standing up against a foreign country from thousands of miles away that's imposing unfair rules and taxes. And that kind of sounds a little like our country, doesn't it? One major difference, though, Ho Chi Minh was a communist. And so, because of that, you look at this year, and you know we're in full blown containment mode, right? We know the Soviets already have a bomb, and Korea just ended the year before, and it didn't end well. So, we are going to be exceptionally kind of concerned about this. And so, we first start pledging money and advisors and support for the South Vietnamese, who were not all in line with Ho Chi Minh. Okay. So this is really where our country's involvement starts, and it's slow and steady. It's slow and steady. Eisenhower will continue to send money and supplies, and then we get JFK. Now, JFK, remember, he's a little embarrassed by the Bay of Pigs invasion. I don't know if you remember that from world history. He wants to seem tough on communism. He's also frustrated that Berlin Wall was constructed under his watch. So we've been supporting, our country had been supporting a leader in the South, Gogin Ziem, and but he was getting increasingly hard to support, folks. He was really mistreating a lot of Buddhists in Vietnam. There's a very famous picture. In fact, it's the first one on the timeline of a Buddhist monk self-immolating to protest his brutality. So it was really hard for JFK to support this guy. And one of the last things JFK does is sign off on a CIA-sponsored coup to overthrow him. You look at that date on your timeline, you guys can see it's right before JFK was killed. It's one of the last things he does. So JFK also sent some special forces, and a lot of historians say it might have been JFK that would have sent ground troops. We'll never know because he was assassinated before that could happen. So hence, he also avoids the blame for the Vietnam War. That, friends, is going to rest squarely on the shoulders of Lyndon Baines Johnson. So LBJ uphold the previous policies of containment. So he had gotten involved in the Panama Canal Zone rioting in 1965. He had actually deployed 20,000 Marines sent to the Dominican Republic in that same year. He was dealing with the 6 Days War between Israel and Palestine and Egypt and Syria. I mean, there's a lot on his plate. So he really kind of looks at the situation in Vietnam and says, you know what, we just need to get this over with. Let's get it in and out. Let's be done. So the Gulf of Tonkin resolution is where the movie starts. And I have a little video here that you can click on, and it might be good to just see that. You're actually going to see a newscast from that night. And it's August 1964. And one of our ships, which was patrolling off the waters, was fired on by one of the North Vietnamese ships. And so this is when Johnson kind of uses this as an excuse, essentially, for what we call a blank check to do whatever he wanted in Vietnam. He asked Congress, and as you're going to see, overwhelmingly, Congress approved. I think there were 2 or 3 votes against it. And in the movie, you'll hear from one of the guys who voted against it. And oh, it always kills me because what he says comes exactly true. So pay attention to that moment. But we never declare war in Vietnam. This is an undeclared war. The Gulf of Tonkin resolution is the closest we ever come to declaring war. So, yeah, so this is where the movie really starts. Okay. So I wanted to give you that background so you knew why we were there, what our interest was before we even get involved. The very next year, Johnson in March 65, again, he wants to deal with other things, you guys. He wants to deal with his programs for civil rights. He wanted to be known as a civil rights president, and to some extent, he really is. We'll see that. But he will be absolutely overshadowed and bogged down by the mistakes that are made in Vietnam. And he deserves that blame, I will argue. And I think you will see that as we go through the evidence. I think if he was here today to talk to us, I think he would say, don't just blame me. I was doing what the guys before me did. And I think that is also true. So think about that as we go through. So the movie goes year by year. It's a powerful soundtrack. At first, it's very well supported, and you'll see that. And here's another little video, The Ballad of the Green Berets. This one released in 1965 at the beginning of the war, when a lot of people really thought, okay, yeah, we are doing the right thing containing communism. We should be there. But you guys, as the war drags on, here's the different parts. I'm going to link to those. As the war drags on longer and longer, and the death toll goes higher and higher and higher, and there is no end in sight and no real plan, you're going to hear the music change. You're going to hear the people's voices change in the movie. So I want you to be on the lookout for that. Okay. We'll be analyzing some song lyrics. The 2008 DBQ had these song lyrics as a document. So you might get that, I mean, you just might get song lyrics you have to analyze. So we'll make sure we practice that too. The real turning point, and be on the lookout for this event, is the Tet Offensive. And that's really when Johnson had been saying we were winning, we were winning, we were winning. And it was clear that we weren't, even though we win this battle. Okay. They managed to surprise us in every single city. And it showed that this war was nowhere being over. So Johnson surprised everyone then and announced he wasn't going to run again for president. And that threw the Democratic Party into a tailspin, because they thought he was going to run. So all of a sudden now they have to quickly come up with a candidate and run a primary. You guys, it was a mess. And the Democratic National Convention in Chicago turned into anti-war protests. Students were rioting. It was a disaster, but it did definitely allow the Republicans to gain control. And Richard Nixon, finally, he ran once and he finally becomes the president here. But it's a very divisive year. This is the year both of my parents graduated from high school. So we think we've got it crazy with this COVID-19. I can only imagine what was facing my mom, my dad, and all of the seniors that year when they were at the peak of the involvement in Vietnam and the draft was going, and because you didn't have a choice. You had to go. It was that or you were breaking the law and you went to jail. Or you could go to another, right? I'll go to Canada, right? Easier said than done. I mean, by saying I'm going to go to Canada, you never again get to set foot in the United States. You don't know that you're going to get a pardon, right? Later on, there will be a full pardon for all the draft dodgers, but it's a hard situation. So yeah, so I've got all kinds of stories to tell you when we meet again. But Richard Nixon will come in with a different strategy, and you'll see Vietnamization. There's a really emotional moment where the soldiers find out they're going home. It gives me chills every time I watch it. Be on the lookout for that. But as Johnson's announcing that he's going to pull the troops out, or I'm sorry, as Nixon announces that, Nixon, being very Nixon-y, is going to say one thing and do something else. We're going to see that's a thing that Richard Nixon does a lot. So what he's going to do as he pulls our troops out is he's hoping the South can stand on their own. But folks, that's the problem with the whole Vietnam War. The South was never strong enough to stand on their own. And we get to the point where they can't stand without us. And we don't want to be there forever, right? So Nixon's pulling our troops out, but he starts secretly bombing Laos and Cambodia, trying to take out the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Well, when people found that out, and they also found out that there were a lot of civilians being murdered, right? And the atrocities were happening, and civilians were being killed. And there's some really powerful pictures and words you're going to hear in the movie on this. People were mad. And that's why on May 4th, 1970, we're about to have the 50th anniversary of this, there were protests all over the country. My parents are both at Bowling Green, and their schools shut down. Every school in the state of Ohio shut down and said, "Go home, get out of here." They did not want students on their campus because of this. And these four students, two of them were just walking to class, had nothing to do with the protest. So there's a song that's pretty powerful, written that night by Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. You can check that out here. And then you're just going to see the peace talks that really failed to get anywhere until 1973. And then what we end up with is a ceasefire that says, well, we'll just have two Vietnams. It's a very Korea-esque ending. But then, you guys, that doesn't even last. Because remember, what's the whole problem the whole time? The South can't stand on its own, right? So as soon as our troops left, the South couldn't stand. And we had our own set of problems. We had our scandal here, Nixon's resigning in disgrace. We had a president who is not elected walking into this mess, and Vietnam is falling, and we have our embassy in Saigon. And that embassy, is saying, what do we do? What do we do? And I give Ford a lot of credit. He said it was the hardest decision he ever had to make, but he said, you know what? We need to get out. This is over. And we pulled all American personnel out of South Vietnam that day. Saigon fell to the communists. It became renamed what it is called today, which is Ho Chi Minh City. And Ford was very proud that we were able to get all the Americans out, but we left behind a lot of our South Vietnamese friends and allies. And we also left behind, these are some of the chaotic scenes. If you've seen the musical Miss Saigon, this is when all of this takes place. Came through Playhouse Square last year. Oh, loved it, loved it, loved it. And we're going to talk a lot about that. We're going to talk about the short-term and long-term effects later on. And even I want to talk to you about Operation Baby Lift. I have a really unique tie to this, a personal tie that I'll tell you about. So this war does not end the way we want it to, okay? And you're going to see that tone change as you watch the movie. So kind of be on the lookout for that. Have that timeline out. This is going to give you a little preview of what we're going to see coming next. So I hope you enjoy it. I know that I really like this one. I know that most of my students really love this one. There'll be so much for us to talk about. So yeah, check it out. Enjoy it this week, and I will catch up with you soon.